There's 25% of Americans who believe that they know somebody who was killed by a COVID vaccine.
Killed?
Killed.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr., a name that sparks everything from admiration to outrage. I wanted to go deeper. I've read 4 of his books, front to back, and today I'm breaking down what I've learned. Stick with me, because whether you agree with him or not, there's a lot to unpack here. Now, before we dive in, let's establish a baseline. RFK Jr. has become one of the most controversial public figures in America. His books cover topics like government overreach, pharmaceutical corruption, and the ethics of medical interventions. The 4 books I read are The Real Anthony Fauci, A Letter to Liberals, The Wuhan Cover-Up, and Vax-Unvax. Each one provides a unique lens into his worldview, one that challenges mainstream narratives. Now, regardless of where you stand politically, it's clear that RFK Jr. is tapping into something deeper, an unease about the system we've come to trust. Let's start with The Real Anthony Fauci. This book, The Real Anthony Fauci, dives headfirst into the intersection of medicine, government, and profit. RFK Jr. paints Fauci as a central figure in a web of conflicts of interest between regulatory agencies, pharmaceutical companies, and global health organizations. One of his central arguments in the book is that regulatory agencies like the FDA and NIH have been captured by pharmaceutical companies. According to Kennedy, these organizations no longer serve the public interest, but rather act as gatekeepers for corporate profits. He cites, for example, a 2020 report from the Journal of the American Medical Association, which found that 86% of clinical trials for new drugs were funded by the industry itself. Now, is Fauci the villain that RFK Jr. makes him out to be? That's debatable. But this book raises an important question. Who watches the Watchmen? In A Letter to Liberals, RFK Jr. doesn't just critique pandemic policy. He appeals to the foundational principles of medical ethics and liberal ideology. His central argument, that the pandemic response violated core values like bodily autonomy, freedom of speech, and skepticism of authority. But to truly understand his point, I think we need to look back in history. Let's go back to the aftermath of World War II. The Nuremberg trials were not just about holding war criminals accountable. They gave rise to a new understanding of medical ethics, born from the atrocities committed in the name of science. One key outcome was the Nuremberg Code, a set of principles that include the necessity of informed consent and the right to refuse medical treatment. RFK Jr. argues that the spirit of the Nuremberg Code was betrayed during the pandemic. Mandates and coercive policies, he claims, disregarded the individual's right to make informed decisions about their own body. For context, the first principle of the Nuremberg Code explicitly states, and I quote, "The voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential." Now, this is a heavy comparison, and it's one of the reasons RFK Jr. is such a polarizing figure. But his point isn't about equating modern policies to historical atrocity. I think it's about ensuring we don't lose the hard-earned lessons of history. Now, how does this connect to the pandemic? RFK Jr. cites examples from countries like Sweden, which took a less restrictive approach to lockdowns. A 2022 meta-analysis in The Lancet found no significant difference in mortality rates between strict lockdowns and more flexible strategies. Now, for Kennedy, this raises the question, did we trade essential freedoms for questionable gains in public safety? I'm not here to take sides on the politics of all this, okay? But the debate RFK Jr. has ignited about the balance between public health and individual rights is one I think we all need to have. The Wuhan Cover-Up takes us into murky waters. RFK Jr. explores the origins of the pandemic, focusing on gain-of-function research, a controversial area of virology that involves enhancing viruses to study their potential dangers. He makes the case that the pandemic was not just a natural disaster, but a preventable one. Here's the thing, Kennedy's claims about gain-of-function research do align with findings from investigative journalists. For example, a 2021 report by The Intercept revealed that the NIH had indeed funded gain-of-function studies in Wuhan through EcoHealth Alliance. Is RFK Jr. right to call this a cover-up? That depends on your perspective. But his ability to connect the dots between international policies, scientific institutions, and political interests is undeniably compelling. Now, this brings us to Vax-Unvax. This book is RFK Jr.'s most controversial, as it challenges the safety and efficacy of childhood vaccines. Now, let me be clear. I'm not here to debate vaccine science. I've used vaccines in practice, and I personally believe in them very strongly. But Kennedy's arguments center on transparency and informed consent. He points to the lack of double-blind, placebo-controlled studies for many vaccines as a significant gap in our understanding of long-term effects. While the CDC and WHO strongly affirm vaccine safety, Kennedy questions whether industry-led research is enough. A 2018 BMJ study found that only 19% of clinical trials for vaccines were independently funded. Even if you disagree with his conclusions, like a lot of us do, his insistence on asking hard questions is something I think we should all consider. After all, science thrives on scrutiny. So, what's the takeaway from reading RFK Jr.'s work? Well, love him or hate him, he's not afraid to challenge the status quo. His books are a wake-up call for critical thinking in an age of echo chambers and information silos. I am not here to tell you whether RFK Jr. is right or wrong. What I am here to say is this: understanding opposing perspectives is crucial, not just in medicine, but in life. I'll leave you with this thought. The best way to build a better system is to question the one we already have. Stay dynamic, folks. Peace.